Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to the shop. I'm glad you decided to join me again. It's always fun to come up with some new content every week to try to share with everyone. It's springtime around here, so the shop gets a little bit neglected this time of year with the yard work and gardening and things like that to be caught up with in the springtime. But we managed to get in here and find something to do every week. This week, I thought it'd be interesting to go over some homemade tools that I've done throughout the years. One thing about myself is I've always had access to a welder, and for most of my adult life, I should say, I've had access to machinery. If it was with an uncle or at my job. So a few of these tools are simple. All you need is maybe a saw and a welder, but some of them you need to do a little machine work. So there may be a commercially available tool that does the same job, but when I'm in the middle of a job, sometimes you don't want to stop to go get that. And some of these tools are back in the days before we had access to tools like Harbor Freight and Amazon and things like that. But I'm glad you joined me. We'll share a few of these tools and see what they look like. Alrighty. A few of the first tools are kind of automotive related. Some of these tools I built maybe back in the 70s, but it was, you know, when you need one, you build it. But anyway, this is an example. You can buy steering wheel pullers anywhere, but you know, when you have the machinery or the access to it, you always try to do things on your own. And this is a little steering wheel puller that I made. Just a piece of, looks like 3/4 inch key stock or bar, a couple milled slots and a tapped hole in the middle. And then throughout the years I've gathered the different bolts and stuff to pull steering wheels. These are all SAE and before airbag, but it always came in handy for me. One job I had to do is change a power steering pump one time on a Ford, like in a 67 Ford Fairlane, I think it was, because that's what I had. But anyway, this little tool I built to pull the pulley off the power steering pump. I don't know how many of you have worked on that, but a pulley on in that year Ford's was just a taper fit, and it was a pressed on fit. They were really on there, and I built this little pulley or a little puller to fit in the slots of the pulley and popped it off, which it did. Got that job well done. But just that's a puller for late 60s Ford power steering pump. I don't know how many years they had that kind of pump, but it worked for me then. This little jewel here, which has been around forever too, it was part of when I had my 67 Fairlane. But I had to change the lower control arms on the front of that Fairlane. And this little tool, you could wedge it between the upper A arm and you'd wedge it between the upper A arm and the frame on this end, upper A arm on this end, and then you could let the pressure off and it would hold the coil spring, because the coil spring was mounted above the upper A arm on those cars, which would free up the bottom control arm, which the control arm ball joint were not a separate unit, they were all one, so you had to change the whole control arm if you had a bad ball joint. But that's what I made this tool for back in the day. Let me get a tape measure here. We'll just see how long it is. It's got a total length of about about 7.5 inches. Now I don't know, I can't take credit for this. I know I seen it in a book, like a motor manual or a Chilton's or something, and just copied it, but it worked tremendously to hold that coil spring and upper A-arm in place while you could tear apart the bottom ball joint and control arm. But just another one of them homemade tools. This one here, this big wrench is it would grab the U-joint part of the rear differential, so you could take the pinion nut loose and get the U-joint flange out of the rear end and replace the seal. But just like you could hold the where the U-joint mounts, that casting where the U-joint mounts, and get some pressure on that nut. Came in handy at the time. I don't know if I've used it much since then, but that's just an example of if you need a wrench of some kind, you can always torch one out. This was just torched out, a piece of 3/8 metal, but I put the plastic dip on the end of it. I had a can of that one time and put it on a few tools. It's okay, but kind of makes them look professional, I guess. Anyway, that's kind of the automotive section of my homemade tools. We'll move on to a little bit of general purpose ones here. This here is for wing nuts. It's for taking off wing nuts. When I mean wing nut, this is what I'm talking about, but it fits over the wing nut. This one fits quarter, and I think quarter and 5/16 and 3/8 size wing nuts. But I was involved in a job once where we had a bunch of dust collection pipes, and they were all held together with these V-band clamps and wing nuts. So rather than mess around with trying to screw them on by hand all the time, I made this handy dandy little tool. This is a piece of tubing with a milled slot in it. Again, had access to machinery to do that milling, and welded a handle on it, and it works good for doing the T-nuts, or wing nuts, I'm sorry. Pretty handy dandy little item if you got a lot of them to do. Now this little item here is actually started out as a packing puller for, shaft packing for water pumps and stuff like that. It did have a curlicue like corkscrew on the end of it, but I straightened that out and I put this just hook on it, and this is a spring puller. Works great for I use it a lot now on lawnmower decks with the spring that holds the belt tension on lawnmower decks. But I know there's one commercially available. I've seen them, but sometimes when you're in the heat of the moment, you need to make something. You could make it, this is a flexible shaft, but you could actually make it just out of a piece of rod, well, a little T on the end of it for pulling, but works great to get in there and pull them springs off their mounts for lawnmower decks. That's what I use it for 90% of the time now. But and this little tool here, it's a dimpling tool. I had a job one time where I had to use a whole bunch of 1/4-20 flathead screws in sheet metal, and they wanted them to be flat, so I made this dimpling tool to dimple the sheet metal to countersink the flathead screws. Anyway, like I said, sure there's one commercially available, but I needed it at the spur of the moment and just whipped one up. It works really well. This little tool here, I'll set the camera down, kind of hold this one up. I made this out of an old drill chuck and just a piece of plastic handle, but a lot of times I'll get into jobs where I have to polish I thought I could get it off there. Polish screw heads, stainless steel screw heads. Some of my hot rod buddies always want stainless steel bolt heads and screw heads polished up. Well, I made this drill chuck with a handle on it to hold them screws so I could sand and polish the heads of them. Works really well. This has just got I think a 3/8 fine thread on it. I thought I could unscrew it off there, but I can't right now. But anyway, just make yourself a piece of plastic, tap it for, oh, don't have to even plastic, aluminum or whatever you want to make it out of. Tap it for whatever drill chuck you have, like a 3/8, like I said, this one's 3/8 24, I think. And makes a great holder for screws and little tiny items if you want to polish the heads of them or clean the heads, or it's quite handy now and then. But anyway, that's just that's a few of the odds and ends tools. Now we get down to, well, a little bit of blacksmithing and riveting that I do. Of course, every blacksmith, he's probably got old monkey wrench with a handle welded on it for doing twisting and turning of your metal. Works good. Give that handle welded on there, gives you a little bit of leverage all the way around it, but always comes in handy for twisting, like for railings, twisting a piece of 1/2 inch or 3/8 bar when you make a decorative railing or something. But then this is just fits in the hardy hole, just cut off. Seems to be I could never find a actual hardy cutoff tool, so had a chunk of iron and milled it off and just made one. Works really well if you practice not hitting it with the hammer. Of course, they are all that way, but. And this was just a quick bending tool that I made for the hardy. I had to actually like make a U shape out of a 1-inch piece of hot roll steel. I think it was 1/4 inch thick, but just lay it across there and hit it with a chisel and make the U shape. Anyway, it fits in the hardy hole of the anvil. These are all anvil tools that I've made over the years. Of course, every blacksmith has got 100 different tools they've made. I don't do a whole lot of blacksmithing, but they're fun to play with now and then. These were tools I made. I was riveting a new section in I think it was a 67 Nova grill, and this was to get down inside the channel so I could knock the rivets over on the other side. And this one was the channel set down in here so I could knock the rivets down. But again, they all fit in the hardy hole on my anvil. But just a few homemade blacksmith tools. Nothing too special. Like I said, every blacksmith's got a million of them, but just the ones I've used throughout the years. Now this next section here is for, I did some work on a skid steer. Maybe see it in a couple of videos, but I had to dig all the dirt. The fuel line ran through the bottom pan of the skid steer from one side to the other. It has dual tanks. But digging all the dirt and grease and oil collected through years, I made all these specialty long scrapers. This one here has a bend so you can pull it back out of there. But believe me, when you can't get your arms in places to do things, you can always make a nice little tool to reach in there and scrape away, chisel out the old crap and start with the new. But just this one I got pretty fancy on the handle, but just this one's just 1/2 inch conduit. This one's just a piece of the 1/8 inch, 1/2 inch wide strap. But it worked out nice to have that long reach to get down in the belly of that skid steer to clean that out. Always Always kept them around, haven't used them a whole lot, but they come in useful now and then. This tool here, I was, of course, boring a hole through a foundation one time, and I needed a long chisel. Yeah, of course, I'm sure they're commercially available, but I didn't have one. So I just welded a piece of 1/2-inch bar on the end of this chisel. Old Craftsman chisel, but it got the job done and gave me some reach to get down through that hole. Just needed to knock off a couple high points, but again, when you need a tool and you don't have it, you can always stop and make it. It comes in really handy sometimes down the road on another project. This one here, this tool, is I planted a bunch of pine trees one time, and I used them jobs, tree spikes for fertilizer. Well, bending over and hammering each one of them into the ground when you got 50, 60 of them to do is kind of a pain. So I built this little tool here. You can poke a hole in the ground here to get it started, and then the tree spikes come with these plastic caps, and the plastic cap will fit up inside there, and it lasts for a long time. But anyway, that holds the tree spike, and you stick it in the hole that you created with that end, and it's halfway in there, and then you step on it here and shove it in the ground the rest of the way. It gets it down in the ground a couple inches, and worked great. I loved it. The trees are all pretty big now, so I don't fertilize them like I used to. They're well on their way to being on their own, but just another handy dandy tool that necessity was involved in making. You know, you get the urge to do it a different way, and that's the way you do it. Last but not least is a couple items for my little 12-ton press I have. This is a bending jig, and it's just a couple pieces of angle iron welded in there. And then the wedge on the top with the V cut on it, that's actually from Northern Tool. It's actually a wedge for a log splitter, a weld-on wedge for a log splitter, but worked out great for this project. It had a nice point on it, not real sharp, but. And then the springs, these two springs, they were actually one long spring. They come off of some kind of planter or some old agricultural thing I found laying in the grass, but they come in handy. But it's 3/4 inch material, and this separate little angle iron is to get a little bit tighter bend on thinner material. You kind of got to size your gap in here by your material. But that I made for my press. It really comes in handy for bending like 3/8 and 3/8 and 1/2 inch steel for making brackets and stuff. But then I also made these press plates. You can see these, it's the same thickness, 3/4 inches, that base on there. I don't know where I got the plate, but I actually welded these together and bored the holes. I don't know if you can see where the welds been, or the edges have been sanded. Welded them together with a TIG weld, and then bored the holes. Same way with the smaller hole. But easy way to make some nice press plates for your little press. Sometimes the ones that come with them presses, all the edges are so rounded on them and everything. They're kind of a poor design, not poor design, but not real sharp design. But anyway, these two things I built for my press that really come in handy, especially that brake. That brake really works well. I know there's plenty out there you can buy for them, but why buy it when you can make it, or try to make it anyway. But anyway, that's just a selection of some of my homemade tools throughout the years. Nothing too special. It's always fun to get creative and make what you need for a project, repair, whatever it may be. You make them once, and sometimes that's the only time you use them, but sometimes, well, it comes around, you gotta pull it out again. But that's my homemade tool. I suppose I could throw this one in too. This is a TIG MIG gun holder that I fabbed up out of aluminum, magnet from Harbor Freight. Sticks to the bench. Works really good for holding the MIG or TIG gun. But anyway, that about does it for the homemade tool tour today. I hope you guys enjoyed all this. If you did, please like and subscribe, and share it with somebody else that you think might be interested. I enjoy making these. I'm getting a little bit better, the wife and I, with editing, so hopefully you'll enjoy them. Thanks again, and we'll catch you on the next one.